PCA is done. 3 populations. They separate cleanly along PC1 and PC2. K-means confirms it. High silhouette score, stable across iterations.
You have 3 batches.
These are biological replicates. Same protocol, same sequencer model.
Different run dates?
3 separate runs, but the technical variation should be minimal.
Color your samples by run date.
They map exactly onto the clusters.
Wait, the PCA found the batch effects and not the biology. How does it even do that? What is it actually looking for?
It finds the direction your data most disagrees with itself. 3 sequencing runs, each shifted a few hundred genes by library preparation. That disagreement is larger than the biological signal. PC1 captured it first. The biology is in there. Probably in PC7.
So the actual biology could be sitting in PC7 this whole time, and you'd never see it because everyone stops at PC2.
Correct. Most people stop at PC2.
How wrong are the clusters, though? Concretely, how many fake populations does this produce?
However many batches you had, to understand why PCA finds the wrong thing first, we need to understand what PCA is actually optimizing, and what clustering does with the result. PCA is finding the longest shadow. Your data exists in many dimensions. You shine a light from every possible angle. The angle that casts the longest shadow onto the wall is PC1. The next longest shadow, at right angles to the first, is PC2. You are not compressing your data. You are choosing where to stand when you look at it. Clustering is deciding, after you have chosen where to stand, which shadows overlap. If this is the first time you have thought about what PCA is doing, rather than just running it, subscribe. New episode every Saturday. RNA-seq data has roughly 20,000 genes. Each gene is a dimension. You cannot plot 20,000 dimensions. You need to project them somewhere visible. PCA does this by computing the covariance matrix of your data. The covariance matrix encodes how much each gene's expression moves with every other gene's expression across samples. Formally, the covariance of 2 variables, x and y, is E, x, mx, y, may. For 20,000 genes, this matrix is 20,000 by 20,000. PCA finds the eigenvectors of that matrix. Each eigenvector defines a direction through the data, a principal component. Each eigenvalue tells you how much variance that direction explains. The eigenvector with the largest eigenvalue is PC1, the angle that casts the longest shadow.
20,000 by 20,000. You're computing that for every dataset?
Software computes it. You press a button. The computation takes a few seconds on a modern machine. The point is that it exists. A complete map of how every gene covaries with every other gene. The eigenvectors are the directions the map points.
And the eigenvectors are orthogonal to each other. Each principal component captures variance that the previous ones didn't.
Correct. Each shadow is perpendicular to all the others. PC2 is not a rotation of PC1, it is a direction PC1 cannot see. Before any of this, the data is mean-centered. Each gene's mean expression across samples is subtracted from its values. This step is not optional. PCA measures dispersion around the mean. Without mean centering, PC1 does not capture a direction of variation. It captures the mean. You are finding the longest shadow of something that was never centered on the origin.
So if you skip centering, PC1 is essentially the average expression vector across all genes.
Yes, the longest shadow is pointing at the average gene. That is not a finding. The Scree plot shows the eigenvalues in descending order. Variance explained by PC1, PC2, PC3, and so on. In a dataset with real low-dimensional structure, you see a steep drop. PC1 explains a large fraction, PC2 less, then the curve elbows into a plateau. Past the elbow, the components are mostly noise. If the Scree plot decays smoothly with no elbow, the variation is spread across many axes. The data does not have obvious low-dimensional structure. That is a finding, not a failure.
If there's no elbow, what do? Do you just pick a number?
You pick a number. Common choices are all components explaining 80% of cumulative variance, or all with eigenvalues above 1. Both are conventions. Neither is derived from biology.
So it's still a choice.
Everything in this pipeline is a choice. Each principal component has loading scores. A weight for every input gene describing how much that gene contributes to the direction of that shadow. If ribosomal genes dominate the loadings of PC1, PC1 is not a biological axis. It is a library size axis. The loading scores are calculated in every standard PCA pipeline. They are almost never plotted.
Nobody plots them? Why not?
The scatter plot looks like structure. The loading plot looks like a ranked list of genes. Most people would rather look at structure. Clustering begins in the reduced space. You select the top principal components, those above the Scree plot elbow, and compute pairwise distances between samples in that space. The clustering algorithm partitions those distances into groups. K means assigns each sample to its nearest centroid. It updates the centroids to the mean position of their assigned samples. It reassigns. It repeats until assignments stop changing. The result can differ between starting configurations. Centroid initialization is random by default. Multiple random starts and selecting the most stable outcome is standard. The algorithm requires K before it begins. It always returns exactly K clusters.
Always exactly K, even if the real number is different?
There is no real number as far as k-means is concerned. You provide K. It partitions into K. Whether K corresponds to anything in the biology is a separate question that k-means is not designed to answer.
So we chose 3 clusters because Dr. Seeley typed 3.
Yes. Hierarchical clustering builds a dendrogram. You choose a distance metric and a linkage method. Single, complete, average, ward. The tree is cut at a height you select. The height is not derived from the data. Graph-based methods like Leiden and Louvain, common in single-cell analysis, optimize modularity in a nearest neighbor graph. They take a resolution parameter. Higher resolution gives more clusters. You choose the resolution. The algorithm gives you what you asked for.
All 3 methods have a parameter that determines the number of clusters, just expressed differently.
Yes. K is the parameter in k-means. Height is the parameter in hierarchical. Resolution is the parameter in Leiden. The cluster count is always downstream of a human decision. The correct PCA plot has variance explained printed on each axis. PC1 at 60% and PC1 at 8% are different results. Both look like scatter plots with 2 axes. Only one has a dominant structure worth discussing. If the axes are labeled PC1 and PC2 with no numbers, the plot is missing most of its information.
Most papers I've seen don't have the percentages.
Most papers are missing that information. The percentages are one line of code to add. They change the interpretation of the plot. A silhouette score measures whether samples within a cluster are more similar to each other than to samples in neighboring clusters. High silhouette means the clusters are compact and well separated. It does not mean the clusters are biologically meaningful. Batch effects produce tight, well-separated clusters by design. A high silhouette score on batch-driven partitions is the expected output of the method working correctly on the wrong signal.
So a high silhouette score is consistent with a technically correct but scientifically meaningless result.
The algorithm did exactly what it was asked. The problem is what it was asked. If you have been plotting PC1 against PC2 and coloring by sample group without first checking every covariate you recorded, run date, operator, passage number, reagent lot, you have probably confirmed a technical source of variation and labeled it biology. Every covariate you have needs to be tested against the PCA before any of them earns a biological interpretation. The number of clusters comes from a parameter you chose, not from the data. Different K values, different resolution settings, different distance metrics. Each return different results. All of them are internally stable under their own assumptions. The phrase, "we identified 6 cell populations," contains an unstated resolution parameter that produced the 6.
So the number of populations in a paper is partly just whatever number someone typed in?
Filtered by whether the result looked biologically plausible? Yes, the filter is not always explicit. Cluster labels are interpretations, not outputs. The algorithm returns partition numbers. You annotate those numbers as CD4 T cells or fibroblasts or senescent cells based on marker genes that are enriched in each partition. That annotation is a biological claim. It requires validation. Orthogonal methods, marker panels, literature comparison. The algorithm does not provide it.
Wait, the names aren't from the algorithm?
The algorithm returns integers. Cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3. You decide what cluster 1 is. That decision is yours.
What if you label them wrong?
Then the paper contains a named cell type that does not exist. The cluster exists. The annotation is wrong. PCA is linear. It finds linear combinations of your input variables. If the structure in your data is nonlinear, cells along a differentiation trajectory, subpopulations nested inside each other, PCA will not resolve it cleanly. UMAP and TSNE are nonlinear. They produce a different picture of the same data. That difference is real and contains information. UMAP and TSNE do not preserve global distances. Two clusters close in a UMAP plot are not necessarily similar in the original high-dimensional space. Two clusters far apart are not necessarily distinct populations. The layout is optimized for local neighborhood structure. The global arrangement of clusters in a UMAP has no geometric meaning. Using the position of clusters in UMAP space as evidence for their biological relatedness is not a valid use of the method.
So the positions of clusters relative to each other in a UMAP, that tells you nothing.
About the true distances between them, no.
But people interpret those distances constantly. This population is intermediate between these two. Look how it sits between them on the UMAP.
That interpretation is not supported by the method.
Can you adjust the UMAP parameters until the clusters sit wherever you want?
Within limits, yes.
So someone could pick the layout that looks best for their story.
That is not a hypothetical. Overclustering is as common as underclustering. High-resolution parameters produce many small clusters, some driven by sequencing depth differences between cells rather than transcriptional identity. A cluster that appears at high resolution and dissolves at medium resolution is not a robust cell population. It is a parameter sensitivity. If you do not test multiple resolution values, you do not know which category your clusters fall into.
What resolution should you use then?
The one that produces partitions you can validate with orthogonal methods. The algorithm cannot tell you what that is. You have to go back to biology.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is the work. Single-cell RNA-seq papers routinely identify novel cell populations via clustering. A substantial fraction of those populations are batch-driven partitions, resolution artifacts, or cell quality bins. The fraction is not tracked systematically. There is no agreed reporting standard for which resolution parameters were tested, which results were rejected, and on what basis the reported parameters were selected. The published cell type exists because someone chose a number.
So some of the novel cell types in published papers could just be sequencing artifacts?
Some of them, yes.
How many?
Not tracked.
Is there a way to tell from the paper itself whether a reported population is robust?
Not without the raw data and the analysis code. Most papers do not provide both. You are reading a figure of a UMAP that was generated by a pipeline you cannot see, with parameters that are not reported, producing clusters that are labeled with annotations that require decisions that are not described. The figure looks clean. It is mildly instructive that the most visually compelling output in single-cell analysis, the UMAP with colored clusters, is also the output with the most unstated decisions embedded in it. Every parameter choice made before that figure was generated is a decision about what the data is allowed to show. Most of those decisions do not appear in the methods section. The figure is clean. The choices that produced it are not visible in the figure. The clusters are always there.